Welcome to SHI's Research Breakdown, where we turn complex research into quick conversations that matter to your business. Today's conversation draws on the SHI Insights article, The Impact of the 2026 Memory Shortage on Data Center Buyers, which featured in the February 20th issue of the Research Roundup LinkedIn newsletter. Now, this research was written by one of SHI's field CTOs, Steve Troxell, and it provides insights into the background to the shortage, the potential impact on organizations, and advice on how IT and data center leaders can mitigate the impact on their business by taking a pragmatic approach. I'm Victoria Barber. I head up the Strategic Insights function here at SHI, and today I'm joined by the report's author, Steve, and by Russ Cantwell, who heads up our Strategic Technology Office. So, Steve, your research highlights the need for scenario planning to help avoid being overwhelmed by the fear, uncertainty, and doubt caused by this shortage. So, what do IT leaders responsible for data centers need to focus on in order to navigate through this situation?
So let's do something here and talk about the research we did and the reasons why. So within our strategic technology office, our job and charter is to understand what is really going on in the industry and how do we make sure that our folks that talk with the customers understand how to guide them effectively with the best information that we have available. So our approach was different. We looked at the potential for different scenarios to play out on a month-by-month basis. If this happens by March, these are the things we're going to be expecting. So I think having the ability to, as an organization, keep tabs on what are we seeing develop. For example, the high bandwidth memory issue, it's needed specifically for AI. So not a lot of other use cases for it today. And if AI growth doesn't match what the orders were, well, then the wafer allocations, the wafer starts as they're called, they go towards traditional DDR5, which could increase the supply and therefore make it where the shipments are quicker, less lead time, and the prices potentially could also fall. Basically, what we learned in that as we went through month by month through the entirety of 2026 to understand how to make sure that we could effectively help our customers when they're trying to figure out how to execute on projects. We look at those strategies based upon the month and what actually occurred. And if something occurs earlier than we forecast, we know they'll have a downstream effect on the availability. So your lead times start coming in first and foremost. Prices probably don't. But once it gets to a certain point, we know prices will start dropping. So these are those broader projections that we did based upon the scenarios that could play out in the manufacturing sector, as well as the demand, right? The pulls. Is it AI workloads or general computing workloads? And then that downstream consequence will affect the pricing and availability to OEMs, the server manufacturers, for example, and endpoints. We have customers where they are onboarding 2,000 to 3,000 people a year. They give them their own devices. Well, if that strategy was drop ship and give them device as we extend offers, well, that's not the world we live in today, right? So I think going into the workflows that are affected by the things that are ordered, that's another kind of nuance that we can bring into this thing. And that also plays into the timing of what can you expect based upon certain types of activities out there in the industry.
I want to keep taking this in a really strange direction. In the last episode, we talked a bit about the design paradigm with which I personally operate, but a lot of it is rooted in traditional enterprise design. I'm going to assume that most people listening to this are familiar with the concept of establishing a quorum. So if you aren't familiar with it, it's n divided by 2 plus 1. The minimum requirement of that math problem is 3. So you design for 3 things, right? Why do you do that? Because you need one, you need a second one to back you up. And if something fails, you still need that second failure paradigm traditionally. That's why I have 3 gaming desktops as an example. But what if I told you that we now have a couple data points for these super cycles discussed on the last pod? And we have 2020 election, we have 2020 election, 2020 year. God, that was an election year too. A lot of stuff crazy in that year. So a lot of stuff went on that year that was crazy. There were a lot of businesses struggled because of the shortages then. Now we have 2026. We have this AI cycle as well. What if design to availability became another constraint? It's how would you design against this in the future? When we design infrastructure, we have to assume loss. We design for certain number of nines of availability. 4 nines of availability is 8 hours of downtime a year. What if you assumed that once every X number of years, you would lose the ability to procure the thing you needed? Because it's happened twice in 5 to 6 years at this point. So how do you do that? A lot of people assume, based on the just-in-time manufacturing piece, that they part of their availability play is a support contract. I have 4-hour response time, or I can get X amount of hardware in 6 to 8 weeks. That plays in to really, really good design. Not everyone does it, but if you're thinking of all your variables, that is a major piece of how you design infrastructure for availability purposes. What happens if the ability to respond in a traditional timeline goes away once every, say, 3 to 4 years? You need to assume that you'll lose a year. So what do? You start planning and building out forecast basis for 3 to 4 years at a time instead of maybe 1 to 2 years. We have customers who buy servers and storage every year, as they probably should. But 3 or 4 years ago, they should have planned for 3 or 4 years, and every ad they have that's incremental to that is replacing the year from 3 years ago to stay ahead by 3 or 4 years. Why do you do these types of things? You do them because you're assuming that a year might fail. In 2026, this year is potentially going to fail for things related to memory. And so what could you do going forward to work around these counterpieces, like design to availability as a strategy? Because there's elements of this that we haven't gone into on this one because we don't talk about it a lot in Steve's piece, but like you can have structural requirements in a business or regulatory body or whatever it is that requires you to do a thing. But ultimately, once again, you are the responsible party for the business. And what you have to do is think about these constraints, talk with the business to define what is acceptable risk. Like for instance, hey, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, if we cannot buy a server in calendar year 2026, is that an acceptable level of risk to our business? Most CEOs probably would say, I don't know, you tell me. And the CIO would say, I don't think it is an acceptable level of risk. So we need to assume that every couple years, we may not be able to get some stuff that we need, and we need to plan ahead for that. Now, the CFO may not like this notion, but the CFO will start asking questions whenever they can't service the business in 2026 because they can't get the thing. These are all the things that we have to come to table as different business units to discuss. And I think that we should start thinking differently about our design characteristics. It's not just availability in the year, which is how we typically design things. It's availability over the years. That's something that I think people should consider going forward and build into their design plans.
Yeah, I think that you're making a very good point here, Russ, is everybody's focused on the problem being on the supply side. It's the supply chain that's the problem. But actually, whether that's where the problem is or not, the solution is in what we do within our business about it. It's no good sitting here wailing and gnashing our teeth and insisting that suddenly somebody ramps up their production. They can't. It's how we prepare, as you say, how we prepare for these things and how we react to them as well. How resilient is our organization? How much risk are we prepared to accept or not? And actually not to assume that things are stable, but to look for those edge cases, look for those anomalies, and you kind of have to plan for those. And I feel like we used to do more of that, but now the assumption is that these things do not happen anymore in the same way.
No. So very good point. We used to do more of this. What changed? People stopped doing what make them good at what they do. And what I mean by that is we, as engineers and architects, IT practitioners, in large part, we moved away from building things. We have moved to the exact same way that we have moved in our home. In our home, how many people maintain a personal catalog of movies, shows, recordings that they put into a VCR or a DVD player? What do? They consume a service that is dictated, managed for them. Businesses have gone down a similar route. They have eschewed control in order to go down the consumption path, where they now put the responsibility on another party. But here's what happens in reality. That is not possible. You are always ultimately accountable for your own business. That is the way our economic system works. You're the one whose stock price is going to go down if the environment that XYZ provider is running for you goes down. You're the one in charge of that. So we've moved away from that concept entirely. I have an entire presentation on this concept because it's driven me crazy in perpetuity, that we as builders moved away from the concept of building because we think it eschews responsibility. This happens first and foremost on security. Like I see it constantly.
I want to say something that's really interesting as you talk about the market itself. And the investors. At the end of the day, these publicly traded companies, they do have to account to that board to make sure that they're performing, right? This is what they're all about. And whether you bought servers, didn't buy servers, if memory's out of supply or not, unless it affects the entire industry completely the same, the market will punish you. And, not all companies are built the same. So I think the part that was really interesting, Russ, when you started talking about this in Victoria, you also kind of went into this idea of, maybe we just got out of the business of doing the hard work. Some of the hard work of the CIO's office has always been how to have good relationships with the peers that sit with her and him at the same level, including the CFO's office. So what a perfect opportunity to say, okay, this is a risk, and risk is always owned by the CFO. Almost every organization has that. If you can find a way to say, look, we need to figure out how do we mitigate this risk, and I need to lean on the CFO's office and your team to help figure this out, because that evaluation cannot be within the strict domain of IT. You will miss a lot of opportunities to do things better. It's just so many other things can come to the table when you start talking to the CFO's office in a meaningful way. And this is a really good way to do that, to extend that relationship and really help reframe the way that the organization approaches technology. Technology and data, it's the nature of business today. It's not somebody else's business. It is the business. So when the CIO is working, it's almost more today than it was maybe 10 years ago, where they are a peer of the CFO, because the CFO is dealing with the ability for an organization to maximize its capital investments over time. Well, that's almost the identical with the CIO's charter, which is really to maximize the use of technology and information to the benefit of the organization over time. So there's this parallel, you could say, between the two that exists more today than it did, say, 5 years ago and 10 years ago. And this DRAM shortage, it's going to be something that calls attention to this idea that we do have fragile supply chains. It's not something that's likely to change and go away. It's going to manifest in a different way, maybe every single year. So how do you design that? Do you buy early and a lot more than you need today for the challenges that could face you tomorrow when you don't know what the challenges are going to be tomorrow? Frankly, a lot of technologies in AI, when our customers are building it, it has an 18-month shelf life. In 18 months, the thing you just implemented must be removed because it's no longer going to be doing what you need it to be doing. This is a really hard place to put, CIO. And if you don't have that partnership with the CIO's office, going to the CFO, you're definitely going to fail.
So, as I think we've talked about before, this seems that this is an inflection point. This is a point at which we have an opportunity for IT to have that conversation with the business about how we do things differently, how we should be working more effectively together, and really be more partners. And hopefully there are organizations in which the teamwork is there. But we know that in a lot of cases, there can be some antagonism between IT and the business. But this is really that opportunity to turn it around and say, as Russ said, we have to be prepared for this. And this is not just about IT being prepared. It is about the business coming up with what should our strategy be? What is important to us? What matters to us? And where do we want to have that responsibility? Where does the accountability sit? And if I'm accountable, what responsibility do I want to delegate, given that I am the one in the firing line if it does all go wrong?
Well, the CFO has to be part of that too, and I think that's probably where the friction exists. So going to that resilient organization concept, when we have a CFO stating something like, you need to cut costs at all costs, right? This mantra, we need to reduce our costs by 5, 10, 15% in technology this year. That risk balance of, okay, if we reduce these things, we're no more vulnerable to the shocks associated with supply chain or cybersecurity or you name it. We expose ourselves to that. Is that what we're willing to do as an organization? Now, the board has to have a say in that. If the board doesn't have a say in it, they have no visibility to this piece. When the CFO gets a mandate and delivers that, does the CFO's office truly own that risk? Or is it a pivot to say, well, that's actually a failure of the CIO's office, right? So this is the nature of friction and why this is such a difficult thing to do. That is something that has to be accounted for. But at the end of the day, they will both fail. So, when the market punishes an organization, the CFO is just exposed to the CIO. I think they all know that at the end of the day. And I think that's, if there's anything, the saving grace is that we both share a lot of things in this thing, and we can definitely do better if we work together.
But can I give a natural sort of conclusion to that comment, almost an exclamation point on top? My group, the Strategic Technology Office, people like Steve, former CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, sitting in the chair. They've had these responsibilities. These aren't people that are just talking just to talk. They trust me. We've lived it. We've been on the 3 a.m. calls. We know what it's like. The interesting part about this is we push back on one pretty consistent notion that feeds into this problem Steve is describing. Our customers regularly describe who their customers are as internal employees. The employees to their business are their customers. Stop. No, they are not. Your customers pay you money for what your company provides a service or product for.
Yes.
You are business partners with the internal employees in your business. That is a very different relationship than customer to service provider. And in order to have the seat at the table that Steve is describing, you must behave as partners. So stop treating them as customers, because they will do what customers expect, which is for you to take their order and respond in kind. So we have to end that paradigm.
I think that's a very, very important point, Russ. Not the first time I've heard it, not going to be the last time. But I do think that's an incredibly important point, and I think that's a good place for us to finish. Thank you both so much for joining us for this insightful discussion, and thank you to our listeners. If you'd like more information on how to navigate through the memory shortage, you can find links to additional material in the show notes. And you can find more episodes of the Research Breakdown wherever you get your podcasts, and sign up for the Research Roundup on SHI's LinkedIn page. SHI Media, you heard it here.